Now, first of all, I'm joined by Mark Francois. You've led the inquiry into the defence procurement for the Defence Select Committee. You're also alleging that the MOD's procurement system is broken. You're also the MP for Raleigh and Wickford, and of course, you're chair of the European Research Group, the ERG. Mark, thanks for coming in this morning.
Good morning.
Good God, this report doesn't make for great reading. You're talking about a procurement system that is broken. You're talking about the fact that we are not adequately defended. We've not got enough ships, tanks or planes. And now the Defence Secretary has bailed.
Yeah, it's not great. So to put it into context, we spend about £50 billion a year on defence, and almost half of that is spent either on buying equipment for the armed forces or servicing it while it's in operational service. So we looked at that half of the money that's being spent, and we did indeed conclude that it is broken. In fact, very quickly from the report, this one sentence summarises it. We have discovered, this was after a 6-month very detailed inquiry, we have discovered a UK procurement system which is highly bureaucratic, overly stratified, far too ponderous, with an inconsistent approach to safety, very poor accountability, and a culture which appears institutionally averse to individual responsibility. And as a result of that, we go on to conclude we believe the system is now in need of major comprehensive reform.
Are you saying that this might be a risk to national security? Because obviously we're facing unprecedented threats from Russia and China. I mean, the timing of this report, you would have thought that we'd got our ducks in a row, we're providing all of this weaponry to Ukraine, and it seems as if we can't really get our own house in order. Yes,
I mean, it is a risk to national security and also to that of our allies. There is a war in Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg, the very well-respected Secretary-General of NATO, who Michael Portillo knows well, said before Christmas, NATO could get drawn into this conflict. So we might, conceivably, have to fight at short notice. And for instance, if you look at the army, some of the vehicles we would have to fight with, because of these procurement failures, are 40 or 50, or wait for it, even 60 years old. We cannot field a full warfighting division, which is a commitment to NATO. Because of these procurement problems, because the system is broken, we can't meet our NATO commitments to our allies.
You know what the criticism from the left will be about all this, Mark? It will be that there's been 13 years of Tory failure on this. I mean, whose fault is it? Is it Ben Wallace's fault? Does it go further back than that? I mean, you have been in power for more than a decade. Why haven't these problems been resolved?
That's a fair criticism, but for the record, these problems have been there for decades. There were big procurement problems under Labour, with the aircraft carriers, with a thing called the Nimrod.
Procurement problems, you sort of lose faith in the entire system.
Well, that is why we've titled the report, It Is Broke, and it's time to fix it. So we make 22 quite crunchy recommendations, one of which, the chief of which, is a sense of urgency and need not to leave it for years, but to fix it now, and to align accountability with responsibility. Because what you find is the system is so bureaucratic, hardly anyone...
Tell me about some of the numbers, because I think there's a killer statistic in this report, isn't there, about how many people are actually working on procurement.
Right, so we did some international comparisons. We looked at how the Americans did it, the French do it, and the Israelis do it. Defence Equipment and Support, D&S for short, is our main procurement arm. That employs 11,500 people. The Israeli equivalent, the Department for Procurement and Production, or DOP for short, employs 300. So if the Israelis can do it with 300, and they do it pretty well, why do we need 11,500?
Is this a civil service failure, then?
At the system, well, there are military officers involved in it too, to be fair. Our system is far too sclerotic, it's far too bureaucratic, it's far too stratified. We need to slim the whole thing down. Now, there's another imperative, as well as being ready, if we had to fight, and that is, the Armed Forces pay award, 5%, very well deserved by the Armed Forces. The Chancellor said there's no new money. That's got to come out of savings in the MOD budget. If you wanted to find savings, D&S would be a very good place to start.
Start with the procurement. What's your reaction to Ben Wallace saying that he's stepping down? I mean, the timing is appalling, not just because of the state the world's in, but because of these by-elections coming around the corner. Why are so many Tories jumping ship?
Well, on Ben, he will be a loss. He's been our longest-serving Defence Secretary, certainly in living memory.
I mean, has the Prime Minister been found wanting here? I mean, there was a bit of argy-bargy over his comment about Amazon and the Ukraine. He's been denied this job as the head of NATO, seemingly by Joe Biden. Has Sunak not supported somebody who's effectively a Boris Johnson champion?
Let me tell you one thing about Ben Wallace, for the record, if he's going, right? He'll be missed. Ben Wallace, perhaps with a soldier's instinct, Camilla, saw the Russian invasion coming. And he took on the Whitehall establishment to make sure that the Ukrainians got thousands of NLAWs and had time to train to use them effectively in anti-tank ambushes. What that meant, from what we now know of the first 48 hours of the invasion, was if they hadn't had those NLAWs, the Russians would be in Kyiv now. So Ben Wallace, whether you love him or hate him, helped to save Ukraine. That is a fact.
Yeah, so why is he leaving? He's done a really good job, you're claiming.
Yeah, he has.
He's being touted as a future Prime Minister, and he's jumping ship. So this suggests that the Tory ship is sinking, Mark.
Well, I think it's possible, had history been different, Ben Wallace could have been Prime Minister. But anyway, he's not going to be now. I think he was capable of doing the job. He was very widely respected across the party.
Should the Prime Minister have done more to kind of keep him in line, in the sense that we're now talking about a reshuffle? Who should come into this cabinet? There's lots of criticism from the backbenchers that this cabinet is, a second 11. It's not up to scratch. Who would you like to see in there? Would you like to see some grey hairs go in and try and shore up this sinking ship? Your David Davises, your IDSs, perhaps. Maybe you want some more Brexiteer ballast in the cabinet.
Well, I respect David Davis and IDS, but I don't pretend to be the Prime Minister, so I'm not going to pretend I'm going to pick the cabinet. I will say one thing, though. With that war going on in Ukraine, whoever they put in that post...
Who should they put in?
Someone who understands defence. James Heapy's the number 2 in the department. He would be a very good choice. What we can't afford to do is to bring in a defence secretary who doesn't know the difference between a tank and a helicopter, just for tokenistic reasons.
No.
We need someone who actually understands.
Do you need a former military man or woman?
It doesn't have to be someone...
Penny Mordaunt? She was there briefly, then she got shuffled out. Should she be shuffled back in?
Well, perhaps having been in the military would be an advantage, but it just needs to be someone that understands defence, because you can't afford someone with a war in Ukraine to come in cold.
Who would Mark Francois want in this role?
It's not my decision. James would be very good.
You're really close to these matters.
I think Penny would be very good. IDS knows a lot about it. You just need someone who would hit the ground running because of the challenges that we've got. Just
a couple more questions on Toryism, because look, you're obviously the chairman of the ERG. I suppose there's this sense that caucus has shrunk and you've been overtaken by the likes of the New Conservatives, and you've still got the One Nationers. What's the state of conservatism? I've done a story in the Telegraph, I don't know if you saw it on Saturday, talking about some of the more right-wing people in the party saying to CCHQ, you're basically selecting too many closet Liberal Democrats. We need to get back to Thatcherism. Talked about these 32 central true blue Tory seats. You've got to shore up the right wing of the party, haven't you? Because at the moment it's sort of flailing.
I think the really important thing is that the associations are allowed unfettered to choose the man or woman that they want, because they're the troops that have to go out and campaign for you. They're the ones who go out in the rain and deliver the leaflets. I used to be one. I campaigned for my great friend Sir David Amess back in 1992. I ran his ground war, as we would say. So what I think we need to stop is the interference from the centre, those phone calls the night before the selection meeting to association chairmen saying, oh, it'd be ever so handy if so-and-so, who's very well regarded, were to get this seat. We need to stop doing that.
Do you think CCHQ historically has chosen too many red Tories?
I think it should.
That's a straight question.
Well, I think it should be down to individual associations to choose, not CCHQ.
But you're worried about left drift. I know you are. So you think that these selections for these key seats, because let's be honest, come 2024, you don't know who's going to be left. If there aren't enough righties left, the party's no longer the Conservative Party that you joined, is it?
Well, Camilla, I still want us to win the general election. I know it's an uphill task. We can.
What's the likelihood?
We can if we start giving Conservatives reason to vote Conservative.
How many out of 10 chance would you give the Tories of winning the next general election?
If we actually behave like Conservatives, we could do quite well. But that means things like...
At the moment, it's looking like 3 out of 10, isn't it?
Let's see what happens when we get there.